Hello, everybody. I'm Alex, CEO and founder of MarsBased, and I will be your host today in Life on Mars. And today's episode, we talk to Ingrid Ødegaard from the Norwegian company, founder of the Norwegian company, whereby previously known as Appear.in, one web platform for video conferencing, one of the ones that caught our eye back in 2014 when we were starting the company as a remote and officeless company. It was originally the platform where we hosted our first conferences and our first video calls, and it was also developed in Angular, which was one of the technologies that we worked with back then. So we reached out to them, and we kind of didn't maintain too much contact over the years, but we exchanged a few emails regarding technology, regarding some development insights, and we wrote about them on our blog and whatnot. And so, after a few years, I was like, I should get these people to speak in the podcast. They sound like great people. A few years back, they raised a big round throughout the pandemic. They kind of pivoted their model. They rebranded from Appear.in to Whereby. It's just a really cool product now. It was back then as well, but it's even cooler now. But Ingrid transitioned from being the CTO and co-founder at Whereby to leading product in IndyRIOT, which is a company that we also will be talking towards the end of the episode about. So in this episode, we speak about technology. We speak about their tech stack. Why did they choose Angular? How did they rewrite all of their application from an Angular tech stack, Node plus Angular, to using a React application? When did that happen? How much did that cost? How did they do it with the rebranding, which is also a very cumbersome and tiresome process? We talk about attracting talent, diversity in the teams, being a player from the Norwegian ecosystem, which is not not the ecosystem that we talk about every day, at least in this podcast, of course. And maybe they are much more, people know that region much more for their Swedish neighbors, and most of the startup ecosystem unicorns come from Sweden, not so much from Norway, but they have also really, really interesting companies there. We talk a fair amount about technology, but also about community, because one of the things that they do in the new company where she's joined, IndyRIOT, it is an all-in-one solution for community builders to nurture and cultivate their community with technology. So we will also be talking about that. This is a very great conversation where we intersect technology and business. This is something that we like doing here. And of course, we continue the tradition of interviewing companies we like and companies that have been mostly bootstrapped. So keep an eye on this conversation, because I'm pretty sure that there will be part 2 coming soon. So without further ado, let's jump right into this episode. Ingrid, good morning. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Life on Mars. How are you doing?
Hey, Alex. Great to meet you. Happy to be here.
Just to give some context to the audience, we exchanged some emails back in 2014. I think, I don't know if you were starting your company or not, but definitely Appear.in, that was the name of Whereby back then, was our tool of choice when we started MarsBased as a remote-only company. And we decided that Google Meet or Hangouts or Google Chat, whatever it was called back then, was not good enough for our video calls. And word of mouth brought us to use your product. Right. And so we exchanged some emails back then because we mentioned you in blog posts, you saw it. And I don't know, for whatever reason, we talked about technology as well. You guys were struggling with Angular. But anyways, what was the stage of the company at that time? Give us a little bit of context as to how did you start the company?
So it's really funny to meet you kind of in person now. And really fun to talk to someone who's been following the product for so long. So I think that was probably in the first year after we started, and our product kind of had a really funny start because it was actually an intern project, a summer project. So the first prototype that we launched was a very crude prototype. But then from very early on, we started gathering user feedback and started pretending that we were a startup, even though we were actually a corporate startup inside a bigger company. But people really took to the product because at that time, video conferencing was crap. So we had this vision that we actually want to make people like having video calls and then do it more. We were also a remote team at the time. So we started reaching out to users like you that we saw were using the product actively to kind of understand what they liked about it, what they were missing, and kind of let that drive the product development. So I think that's where we were in 2014. We had probably built out the basic first version of the product, and we're kind of iterating to really figure out who should it be for, and what should we prioritize in our product roadmap.
Yeah, before Zoom, actually, so 2014, it was kind of like you were either using WebEx or something like that, or you were not a serious company, right? If you were you're not using HP, Cisco, all of these kind of softwares. However, on the other hand, using a peer.in, I remember that you had the private rooms, right? And I remember we had a peer.in/MarsBased, and people were like, oh, wow, that's cool. And perhaps because people didn't know it very well here, it was still not common around Spain. They thought there was something that we developed, maybe, I don't know. And so people are like started spreading the word of mouth about the product, right? So did this occur organically, actually, the word of mouth distribution? Yeah.
And in the first 4 months, so we launched the first intern prototype in August 2013. And within 4 months of that, the product spread organically to more than 175 countries. And
oh, wow.
Didn't really do any marketing apart from kind of social media. And it was basically me and like 5 developers. So we just kind of engaged with users, and users spread it because they really liked it and turned into ambassadors. So at that time, I think it was really a big need for people, because if you were to have a 15-minute stand-up, you would spend 15 minutes getting everyone in the call, because it was so much.
Or installing, downloading a client, whatever, right?
Yeah. So. And I think our solution, which is quite unique still, really, it's kind of rooms-based instead of user-based. And you have these rooms that are permanent, and people can drop in and out of them. And you don't have to create a new URL for every meeting. So removing the step of going via the calendar. So for daily stand-ups, it's amazing. You can just have a team room and everyone drops into that at 11.
Yeah. I remember that one of the first things we noticed is like, oh, no registration needed? What the? Yeah, it was pretty disruptive back then, because everybody wanted your data. Everybody wanted to download their
and we
software.
Still have that. For guests, we still have that.
That's good. That's good. No friction. And I guess that's something that was part of our intention to kind of like spread it around. It's like, okay, this just fucking works. Also, the video quality was really good. I remember that back in the day we talked because you guys were struggling with Angular. So what was the first tech stack of the application? Do you remember that? And
so it was Angular and Node on the back end, and
nice.
We were on Amazon. And we were lucky to be part of a bigger engineering team in this digital unit of Telenor, which is kind of the biggest telco in Norway. So we had access to really senior engineers from a very early stage. And I think that's actually one of the reasons that we succeeded in the market, because at the time, WebRTC was quite new, the tech that we were using for the audio and video, which the browser gives you kind of out of the box a lot of the complex things around handling audio and video and setting up the connections between two parties. But a lot of prototypes were built back then using this technology. And our use case is quite obvious, right? In terms of having a URL and everyone who goes to that ends up in a call. But I think what set us apart was we actually started building out a global infrastructure and put a lot of work into making it connections always work on any network, anywhere in the world, on any browser. So from day one, we also heavily invested in supporting all of the browsers, not just Chrome, which was kind of the simple thing to do. But Firefox, Opera, and this has been like a really long journey on working with pushing the browser providers as well to add support for everything we need to work on bugs. So when we started, the tech was quite immature and not really business grade. Because it was, a lot of bugs, which maybe you guys as early adopters are okay with. But once you get to businesses and running like really business critical sales calls and stuff, you really can't have that. So that didn't really come about, I think, until maybe like 2016, 2017. And that's also when we started monetizing and building out paid tiers. So,
I remember that, 2014, we were excited when we discovered every new company using Angular, right? Because that must have been the time around when we started using Angular 2, so Angular, not Angular JS, around that time, and towards the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, it was a lot of like breaking changes and whatnot. There was not retro compatibility, the beginning of TypeScript. So we were super excited about like, oh, this company is using Angular. They are our friends, you know. So that's why we probably will reach out because of that.
I think we got a lot of developer cred for the early version by you doing it because it was really hot at the time. So we had the interns at the end of the summer, and that's how we launched. They wrote up a post on our developer blog about all the cool tech in Angular, Node, and so on, and had a demo and linked to the product. And we posted that on Hacker News. And overnight, we got like a couple of thousand people checking out the product and writing us and loving it and spreading it. And we got like the biggest tech news site in Norway.
Nice.
CEO of our unit company and was like, oh, this is really cool. And he had no clue that we had actually launched something. But it all turned out good. So
and Node was also in the early stages. It was not that popular back then. Like people using Angular would have Java in the backend and not Node. Well, why did you choose Node? Do you remember why did you choose these particular technologies? Why did you want to go for so groundbreaking things?
I don't remember, but I think it was probably because the interns wanted to play around with this cool new tech.
Watertight plan.
The kind of unit that we were inside was also like a Java shop. So we were kind of the kids playing around with JavaScript at the time. But now going on from that, like Whereby is really kind of a JavaScript shop. We stuck with Node, but then we did this big migration in 2019 where we built out a small project that we had started as a progressive web app in React. And we actually ended up building that out to be the full app and being responsive to all screen sizes as well. And this also coincided with us having to rebrand the entire product due to a trademark lawsuit.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that part of the story. Let's go into that then. I want to, to whatever extent you can explain, right? I'm also particularly interested in why did you rewrite, because that's something that you usually don't see. Startups don't have the time nor the money to rewrite, and it's kind of like you're always aiming for growth, and you cannot stop. And so rewriting is really, really expensive, right? But first off, so rebranding, how did that happen, and what technical implications did it have besides the
long and painful process on the legal side that took a lot of energy from us as management having to deal with it. Like we shielded the team from most of it, but so basically when we picked the name Appearin, it was also like during that summer of the interns, so it wasn't really a lot of work that went into it. And from that time and as when we grew, there was another player in Norway or another company that was able to acquire the trademark rights to the trademark Appear for Norway and EU. So I think they were originally owned by another company that went bankrupt, and a lot of complications. But they basically wanted us to stop using it, and then we refused. So we actually went all the way to Supreme Court in Norway. On a small part of it, but eventually we had to stop using the name. So then we had to go through the process of finding a new name and more difficult domain. And we had millions of users, right, who had vanity URLs on.
That must have been painful, though.
It was, but in the end, it actually came out really well, I would say. So we found a name. We actually had a naming company work with us on a creative process on finding a name that would fit, kind of, because we were a global company. The URL was really important, so it had to be fairly short. And we wanted something that was indicative of our vision and the mission of the company. So we had two candidates, two names that we were working with. And then we went into trademark screening, like making sure there were no other conflicts with these names, and then domains, because like that can be a big issue. And we were super lucky. So for Whereby, the whereby.com was actually available for not that much money compared to the other names. So that.
What was the other name? I'm curious. Is it a terrible name, or is it just like you didn't want to pay that much?
No, it was actually, I think we made the decision even before with the domain, but it was something that was had work in the name. And one of the things that we talked about with our design agency that we worked with on the brand identity was like, we don't really want people to be reminded that they're working every time they go in the product.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And there's a lot of kind of use cases that are in the gray zone. Is it work? Is it not? Like you and me catching up. Is that work, or is it just professional networking or pleasant?
Networking has got the work inside. So yeah.
Exactly. But and I think the way that we saw work and society moving as well, with kind of more gig economy, more creative work, less being in the office from 8 to 4, it made sense to have something that was a little bit not more fluffy, but like a little bit more open, and people could kind of fill it with whatever they wanted it to be. So then to come back to the process, we had a quite tight deadline to actually migrate all of the users over to the new domain, and obviously a huge comms challenge on getting everyone informed that this is actually happening. This is the time frame. So the way we did it was to run both domains in parallel for a while, and you could go to your vanity URL and both of them would work, both the new and the old domain, and we would redirect people to the new domain eventually. And then we turned off the old one at the deadline.
What technical implications did it have, like this rebranding process, right? I assume that, because you're not storing a lot of data, because everything that you do is kind of like streaming video, right? And so not a lot of data to migrate. There's URLs are relatively easy to migrate. SEO might have been a challenge, maybe, if not done properly. So what was the
PMO at the time? It was also handling that. So when we evaluated it, it was impact was actually minimal. So we did some tactics to kind of route all the value to the new domain, and I think it took a couple of months before it was back to where it was.
Yeah, in every SEO, in every migration, there's always like what they call an SEO drop. So it's pretty usual, but you bounce back in 15 days, something like that. And most people actually bounce back to places they had never been before in terms of like being higher, ranking higher. So it's good. It happened to also to you. Okay. What? Let's talk about the rewriting process, because I think that's pretty interesting. How did a startup have the time and the means to invest in this kind of thing? Like, how long did it take, and did you suffer from a lot of technical debt? What was the main reason to rewrite the app?
I think the main reason was the Angular project was getting increasingly complicated and difficult to work with. So we saw that things were taking a long time for developers. It was really cumbersome. They hated working with it, and also bugs appearing.
Because React was cooler, right? React was it was all the rage in 2019.
But I think the kind of developer productivity was probably the main reason.
Okay. That's interesting.
And also we saw that we would, regardless of the framework, we would have to rewrite a lot of stuff anyway to get kind of the responsiveness that we wanted. And also now with the new branding, we would have to kind of rewrite the entire design of the site. So we made the decision then, once we knew we had to rebrand, we said, okay, now we're going to put all dev efforts into basically handling the domain change process and making this new React project the main front end. So we spent around 8 months, I think, from we made that decision to going live. So then we worked on rebuilding all of the functionality that we wanted in the new thing.
Also the backend or only front?
Only the front end, I think.
Only the front end, yeah. Okay, yeah, makes sense.
And then we had some interesting things around webrtc and maybe some of the logic that was deeply hidden somewhere. And we had some customers, I think especially one in India, that they refused to give up the Angular client because they thought it was working better for them on connectivity and in some corner case. And a lot of time like trying to figure out why is that actually. So I think that was probably the trickiest part.
But I think that, in your kind of software, at least talking about Whereby, is a self-service software. So no installation needed. You can like set it up yourself. And the good thing about this kind of software is you got thousands or millions of users, and each one is super, super small. It's the tiny fraction of your business. Therefore, you don't have to compromise the direction of where you want to go, because these customers, 35% of our revenue, which might happen in enterprise, right? However, how was your approach to keeping all the clients satisfied? Because obviously you don't scale, you don't have the bandwidth to, or you didn't have the bandwidth to appease 1,000 million users. I don't know how many users you had back in the day.
Yeah, we had some interesting principles that we ingrained in our culture from very early on. And one of them was this phrase, you don't have users before you have thousands. And it basically says that you need to sacrifice or make some of the early users unhappy to get to the mass market. And then we got to thousands and we had to change it to millions. So I think this mindset of always keeping your eyes on what's in front of you and adapting the product to the mass market users, if that's where you want to get to. So I think we were a very traditional, like following the adoption curve product, because we started with like really innovators, which was basically developers who cared a lot about privacy, security. We were peer-to-peer, no friction. But you had to be a little bit techy to actually understand the product. I think in the very beginning, it was so frictionless that people didn't understand what was happening. So when we did user testing, we actually uncovered like people get scared because they just click the link and boom, they're in the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, oh, is this only working for me? Where do I go to the room? It's like, no, this is the room, right?
Yeah,
so
maybe like do a typo.
Right on.
Someone else's room. So we actually had to introduce more friction when we saw that the product started reaching a broader set of users, like people working in sales, marketing, customer service, and so on, to help them kind of deal with and understand what was happening. And also for security concerns, right? That we introduced the ability to lock rooms. So you would have to knock. And avoid people dropping into others' rooms. And also then at some point we had to introduce registration to create and own rooms. In the first version, you could only do that. You could just type something and it would be created on the fly.
Yeah, I remember
So
that.
That's the kind of stuff that like pisses off the early adopters when you do that. But if you don't, you're not going to grow. Because
or the nerds like me, right? That we're just trying like random names and stuff like that. Oh, this works, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So I think the way to go, which I hope we've succeeded on somehow, is also developing other stuff that will keep the early adopters happy and really kind of understanding what they need to do with the product and building that out for them.
Do you find there was a different strategy from say 1 to 1,000 users, and then from 1,000 to 10,000, or maybe when you approach the corporations, maybe starting getting some adoption in the corporate sector, maybe that influence the strategy of product at all?
Yeah, I think so. And I especially recall one of the first product managers we brought on board. That was not me. He was a designer, so he came from a design background and was not particularly techy. And having him kind of design out like how these things needed to look was instrumental, I would say, in making that transition. But I think it really, especially when you start monetizing, because then you need to convince people that, oh, everyone in your team will actually know how to use this. And we did a lot of work in advance of making our premium offering, the first one, on what features do you need? What do we need to put into this premium offering for it to be interesting for you? So then we built out things like custom logo and having company branding on it.
Yeah.
Which is also quite unique, or it still is actually. I think we're the only service that really lets you brand the in-room experience.
I think that every company or every startup that doing B2C sooner or later realizes that B2B is where the money is at, right? So how long did it take you to kind of start exploring B2B?
So I think we started in 2016, early or a little bit before that. And it was also part of the company journey, realizing that we would have to sustain ourselves as a team and not rely on funding from our rich uncle anymore. So then we actually, right after we had launched the first premium product, we actually spun out as a separate company and got new owners. And then we went into a phase of kind of aggressively bootstrapping and trying to grow revenues in the short term. So then we had to switch from being like really focused on building out a very scalable global product and not caring so much about their revenue to really focusing on revenue and churn and analyzing why are people leaving, how should we change our pricing, how do we map to competition in the choice that people are making, what are the different segments that are buying, all that kind of stuff.
And what did you compromise in this change? Because that change seems particularly radical to me, right? So you go from fundraising and optimizing for growth, and then all of a sudden seems to be like overnight you go to optimize for revenue and start bootstrapping and whatnot. You might have had to change teams, maybe reduce team of marketing, increase sales, or change product strategy, change development. What did you have to compromise there?
So we turned over the team, I think, 2 times in this process. Mm-hmm. One time before this, which was more for natural reasons. And then a second time after we spun out. And I think a process like that involves a lot of changes for people, a lot of uncertainty. And as part of the bootstrapping, we also had to go through a process of renegotiating contracts, have a temporary cut in salaries, things like that, that for some people, it just, the sum of everything doesn't really work out. But I think the way we have approached and gotten through those turnovers is basically using them as an occasion to realign our needs in the team and go after the kind of competence that we see that we need. So usually we have been able to get more senior people in with the experience that we need going forward. And I think that's maybe my best advice in terms of hiring and scaling a company is be really specific on what your needs are going to be for the next 6 to 12 months and hire for that. Because you don't know if you're going to get beyond that. So if you hire someone who's more senior than you really need or can afford, you may not get use for them because you need someone who can deal with what you're in the middle of right now.
But let me challenge you on that. Like, you usually don't know where you will be in 12 months because you might not even be there, or you might be in a completely different place as a startup because you pivot, you change sectors, you change markets, you go to B2C from B2B or vice versa. So I don't know. Like, for me, that would have been one particular challenge if I had been in a startup or a fundraising company, right? Being in a bootstrap place, it's like, you know where you're going to be in 12 months, more or less the same exact place with 1 or 2 people more. But that's not in the case of a startup. So how did you actually convince people to join in a company that was, assuming you were scaling up, right? Assuming that you were more like scale up, not so much startup, you got product figured out. Still, you were pivoting a little bit, but you were kind of like more finding the business model, not so much the product. The product had already product market fit.
Yeah, I think the challenging thing about that is product market fit can change, which happened for us later, and we had to pivot, which we can get back to. But I think in general for hiring, we try to find people who are a good match for the culture and really align with the vision. So some of the best hires we've made have been people who've coming to us because they love the product and they see that we have open roles and want to join. So they're already subscribed to the vision. And if they're a match with the culture, that as well. And who can also bring something to the culture that goes in the direction we want it.
What was the strategy in hiring developers? Because from the get-go, you were very open. You mentioned you had a blog, you were reaching out to developers, you were friendly with companies that were using it. And so because, that word of mouth kind of like spread there, I don't know if you did open source. Now, what was your strategy for specifically hiring developers? Yeah,
so I think we always kind of have been very open in our communication on both social media, newsletter, everything, blog. That was quite early on, the developer blog, but I think we also have engaged in the developer community. Like, we had a conference budget. Everyone could go to a conference once a year and worked closely with Mozilla, for example.
Nice.
Had some presence out there and had a quite good reputation from early on. So I think having a little bit of tech cred is quite important. But also we kept a really kind of high bar on developers and involved the whole dev team in hiring. So doing technical interviews with several people in the team and the CTO or engineering manager. Because I think great people want to work with other great people. And that's especially true for developers. So we'd rather wait. If there was any doubt among anyone, we'd say no, which is very hard sometimes because some people like someone, whereas others have like a bad gut feeling, and we try to listen to that gut feeling.
Okay.
But you have to also balance and make sure it's not bias. Especially if you try to have a more diverse team and have candidates that are not like the people you have, you really need like procedures. So we had quite strict procedures in terms of written feedback, everyone writing their feedback, putting a score in a Google Doc before we shared and had a debrief session where everyone would talk through their feedback.
Okay. Now that you brought it up, specifically speaking about diversity, right? How did you tackle this challenge in society? Especially, I mean, to my understanding, from a complete, like I've only been to Norway like 3-4 times, but it doesn't seem to be the most diverse country in terms of certain things, right? So, and I don't have the most diverse company, granted, and that's something that we're actually looking to improve. But how did you tackle this back in the day?
I think we didn't really tackle it, or we started having it in terms of locations. So we opened up for remote hires at one point. One of our best developers wanted to move back to Spain from Norway.
Nice.
So we set that up. So our processes and team were kind of set up and everyone could work from home. So I think having that is a really good basis actually, because then you can start hiring outside of your own country to have access to a much bigger pool of candidates. But I think when we started scaling up in Whereby from summer 2020, when we got venture funding and a really amazing VP of people, we went through everything around our hiring process, interview process, job ads, how we write them, include information specifically that we kind of value diversity, and it's a core criteria for making a good global product, right?
Yeah. Do you have that having somebody? Oh, sorry, I broke you off. I thought.
So our dev team now in Whereby I think is much more diverse than it was before.
Yeah.
But now all of the hiring we did through COVID was fully remote. So
yeah, that was a game changer.
Most of the people that I worked with then.
That's a good point. Remote allows for more diversity just because it allows also for people not so much from, the ethnic diversity and whatnot, but like different backgrounds. People from rural backgrounds, not living in big cities, that maybe they wouldn't have had access to this kind of jobs, and now they have, just because maybe they cannot relocate to big cities because they have to take care of the family or, kind of like the house or whatnot, and now they can do both things and while working remotely, right? My other question for you was like, do you think that having specifically you, like a woman in the leadership team, in the technical part, which is something that is very rare in the industry, help you to improve the diversity number, or to bridge the gender gap in the company as well? Because that's something that we sometimes get like, oh, we would like to work for this company, but like you're 3 dudes running the company. It's like, well, I know.
I hope so. I can't say I'm sure that it made a difference, but I think maybe also having a female founder. Is not that common. And I think that's maybe how I've been most visible. Like our marketing team was like posting all these articles about my tips for remote working and so on. So all of those signals like go out in the market and kind of build up the product profile as well.
Yeah, because being the founder is like, you can have people, you can have a more diverse team in the C-level if you hire them. But you cannot change the founders of the company, right? It's not like we can bring another founder into the company 8 years into the company. But anyways,
Now for my new job, that was actually also something I thought was really cool. And when I met Kimberly, our founder and CEO, now I was like, yes, I'd like to help you on your mission.
Exactly. And that's something that most people are like, most people think that developers are purely incentivized by their salary, which I think it's bollocks, because there are so many things, like there are so many things as to how many people are there, right? And some people can work for salary, some people can work for the joy of working, some people can work because they want to learn technologies. And what we find is that a lot of developers just want to learn from somebody. They just choose their bosses, right? And so in that case, maybe people wanted to learn from you as the CTO of the company, right? So that's something that, I don't know, just wanted to mention. But I wanted to kind of like circle, but sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to say that Kimberly, our CEO, is really concerned with this. So she said to us now, like, your next hire in product and engineering, it can't be a male. So you really need to look for it. So any senior backend engineers out there, get in touch with me.
It will, of course. And we're going to plug this thing into the very end of the episode. But yeah, of course. I mean, if there's always a chance to kind of like improve and to bridge the gender gap is when you create the company, right? I always mention that when our first hire at MarsBased should have been a woman, but she turned us down last minute, the first developer, because she wanted to go for a PhD. And I think that would have changed the company, because I was like, oh, you got only one developer, is a woman. And then we ended up hiring a bunch of guys instead, right? But you never know. Maybe the other parallel universes, it's like that, but I think
at least we need to make the effort so that
correct
that we have, the people we interview should have representation, not just on gender, but also kind of background and education and so on. But if you don't have that, you're never going to have diversity in the company in general.
Absolutely. And especially because I think that another thing that maybe I might be biased here on is that, it in certain countries it's much easier to have this amount of diversity, because maybe the immigration has been maybe more, how to say, like more integrated into society, and therefore they are in higher ranks. Like maybe in the UK particularly, I think it might be easier to have more representation of certain ethnic groups, because they have been for so long integrated into higher levels of society that maybe doesn't happen in other countries. And therefore, these countries are kind of like pushing their agenda onto us, which I think it's fine because we got to change. But it will take a little bit more time. Just chill, right? But anyways, and also one thing that, for us, particularly speaking on MarsBased, one of the things that I wanted to also commit to change. Of course, gender gap is like super important, but in our case, it's like people with no university degree, right? Mm-hmm. Because most of them, they are always left out. And I remember I do have a university degree, my co-founders have, but like I remember like some of my friends being discriminated when they were looking for jobs because they didn't have any. They were way better programmers than I was, right? And we said like, we're going to create a company, not going to take a look at any kind of formal education, right? And I think, to my understanding, coming from a working class background, that's also diversity as well. But anyways.
I think some of the best developers I've worked with have been self-taught.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can recall that back in the day, we hired a pianist that wanted to become a developer. One guy working in construction, turned into a developer. He's a freelancer now for us. And we've got a philosopher. We've got a librarian. So it's like nobody is really a developer except for me, and which I don't develop anymore.
That's great. That's how you get a great product, with different perspectives and ideas coming from different places.
And you keep the company very organized if you have a librarian. Anyway, circling back to the pivoting that you mentioned, because we're going to go into the second block of the interviews. I assume that pivoting came when the pandemic struck. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember that you mentioned in our previous conversation that everybody flocked to freaking corporate versions of your product just because maybe they wanted to play it safe, or maybe the corporations were like, okay, we're not going to use Whereby because it's not Cisco, HP, or IBM, right? What happened there?
Nobody gets fired for buying Microsoft. So
or IBM. I totally get it. Yeah.
But everyone had to get a video conferencing solution in place. They had to have something overnight. You go to the ones you have a relationship with, right? Whether it's Google or Microsoft, and it becomes harder for, even if people in the organization and the teams loved using Whereby, like they got these solutions mandated from the IT department, basically, for bigger companies. So I think the core of our user base wasn't that much affected, like agencies like you guys. But we throughout towards the end, if we're still there. Maybe we're not, but
I don't know anymore. It's just I've given up.
Of the pandemic, we saw that it was really hard to get growth on the self-serve product. But so what happened was we had an MVP of an embedded product, which you can basically integrate into other products. So if you wanted video calling in your app or product, we had a set of APIs that you could just embed. And I think the nice thing was it was a higher level kind of experience than a lot of the other API providers where you have to kind of code everything yourself. So with us, you got basically the room experience stripped down a little bit. So it was the battle tested design that we constantly iterate on, and you don't really have to do that part yourself. And I think in the start of the pandemic, we got like 900 leads in 2 weeks because so many small businesses had to move their business online overnight, had to keep communicating with their clients and continue offering their services, be it like piano teachers or therapists or healthcare. One of our biggest customers was a startup called Accurex in the UK that was a sub-vendor to the NHS and was delivering kind of a booking solution that doctors were making appointments with clients on. So they got in touch on Friday afternoon, and by Monday morning, they started rolling out video calling to 3,500 doctors in the UK using our APIs. So,
yeah, healthcare throughout the pandemic was. But how many of these wanted to actually pay? Because everybody wanted a tool, but nobody really wanted to pay back then.
Well, I think they did. At least these kind of like serious use cases. And bigger companies. So I think a lot of our revenue growth through the pandemic actually came from that product, and it grew to be almost half of our revenue. So then that's where we are right now. And it's kind of a nice symbiosis because most of the other API providers also, they don't kind of use their own APIs, whereas we do. And we constantly iterate on the user experience and have millions of users using that self-service product overnight. And then we kind of develop the APIs to handle that. And you can test and feel what it looks like without integrating it. So we've now kind of applied all of the self-service logic that we're used to on that embedded customer journey as well.
Which is funny, right? Because a lot, like pretty much everybody moved desperately towards the online and remote and virtual and whatnot. But progressively, a lot of people, maybe most of the people, wanted to go back to the office, right? So that's what we're seeing in the stock market right now. Is like tech was overinflated, overhyped, and now we're paying for these overvaluations. But maybe in the case of certain companies, they grew too much. We've seen it in some companies in Barcelona that, they profited a lot from the growth in 2020. They were like, yeah, we survived the pandemic, we even grew and whatever. And like that, now they're deep in the shit because obviously that was not sustainable growth. And a lot of their revenue disappeared overnight when restrictions were lifted and whatnot, which is exactly the contrary, the opposite of what happened to companies that they were relying on offline traffic and like hotels and restaurants and whatnot, that overnight they lost the traffic, right? So in a sense, it's kind of like, oh, maybe you have bitten more that you can chew, but I don't know. Like, I hope that the company is still doing well and that B2B, that switch to B2B has been paramount to keeping the company alive and well.
I think we're in, or Whereby is in a lucky place because we had quite a high level of revenue already. So not that dependent on funding. Whereas a lot of what we're seeing in the market or hearing in the market is a lot of early stage startups are struggling if they haven't reached the point where you have some revenues yet. And then it's increasingly hard to fundraise, I think, in these times.
Yeah. Is it already a profitable business or not yet?
It depends how you adjust.
It depends how many people you fire, right?
Yeah.
Every company is profitable provided you fire the right amount of people.
Yeah, but it's right now it's kind of at a stable level where we can continue to serve customers in a really good way and kind of go back to like having a little bit of a slow and steady growth.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I was asking is because it seems that whenever we interview bootstrap companies over here, of course, as being a bootstrap company, maybe we have this community, they get better numbers in the listening episode. But anyways, it will take them 40 minutes to reach this point. So by now, they should have listened to the episode. Yeah. But I think that maybe it's a good way that not a lot of podcasts talk about profitable or bootstrap businesses, because most of them are like growth, investment, and product and startups and whatnot. It's like maybe I have to bridge this gap of maybe the companies that will survive the pandemic and economic recession, downturns and whatnot, are those that are profitable, sales oriented, and like cash effective, right? So I don't know, props to you for going that way. Yeah.
I'm going to an investor garden party later, so I'll get the latest intel, but I think there is still funding for good companies out there.
Yeah.
But, it's just a much more narrow.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I think like the word out there is it's going to take twice the effort to raise healthy amount, right? Yeah, and especially people will not invest in growth, they will invest in cash management and whatnot. I wanted to dedicate a few minutes to talk about IndyRIOT, right? Because you moved on from Whereby, assuming that you keep a board on the seat or advisory role, something like that, because as a founder, that's something that is hard to let go. But talk a little bit about IndyRIOT and what are you bringing from Whereby into IndyRIOT?
Yeah. Well, I think all of the learning that I've talked through, definitely. So I think Whereby got to the point where it was quite a mature product. And I realized when managing kind of so many people, both product and engineering, I got very distant from the product, and I kind of wanted back to a little bit of the chaos of an early start stage. And also, as a founder, you really need to be the driving force on the vision and ideas and so on. And we had so many great people coming in, and especially our new CPTO at Whereby, Andy, who came from Amazon in the UK. He took over my role in a great way, and I really felt it was the right time to let the new ideas flow. So I felt a need to work on something new, like completely new. And I got really compelled by the vision of IndyRIOT, which is to give companies the power to build their own community and not be reliant on building on the tech giants platform. So what we're doing is basically building a white label platform and a set of APIs that companies can use to build out their community on. So handling user profiles, content storage, and custom data, what you want to know about your customers, and have recommendations about content and people for them matching the people's interests out of the box, which is quite heavy lifting if you want to build it yourself. And a lot of the kind of no-code website building tools today are very front-end focused. So we're looking to combine some of that with the backend that you would need to build a really great community site. So we're still in an early phase, so looking for really cool pilot customers to work with. So if anyone is interested in that, reach out. I really think that community building is kind of the next trend in marketing, I guess, of companies, or there being a separation between the companies who work really closely with their users or their customers and kind of have a feedback loop with them and have a thriving community be a part of the product. So one of our companies now, it's a hardware company actually, and they have a vision of building up a community for knowledge sharing among their customers as something you get with the sort of subscription to the hardware.
Yeah, and I think that, I can see that this product is going to be definitely successful for two things. One of them is you were really good at community, at Appear and Whereby, right? So that's something that knowledge is going to be paramount to the success of IndyRIOT. And the second is, I've been in the community space for so many years now, I can remember, but there's never been an all-in-one platform, right? So because there's never been such a big mass of potential customers or big necessity for community, whereas now it's so big that maybe it makes sense to kind of like bundle everything together and have like a review and meetup and Eventbrite and whatnot, everything that was separate, try to bundle it together. And there will come a time in which there will be one Google, one Amazon in this space, and we'll have to unbundle it. But it's way too far into the future right now, right?
Yeah, and I think it's almost like a new category. The bits and pieces are there, but I think we're at the stage also where we have to simplify it so that the marketing team and the community managers can do all their stuff in one place and not have to have this patchwork. But
exactly.
That's also a big part of our vision is kind of how we can integrate with other tools and systems. So we can't build everything ourselves, but focusing on making a great workflow for the customers that are community managers. Or
what is your vision for community? specifically talking about tech companies?
So I think our overall vision is unlocking human potential through communities, because we see the power that is there when people kind of align around a shared purpose and can put their energy into making something happen. So really giving them the tools that they need, be it a tech company that needs to scale their product, or we have another customer that we're talking to in education that want to build a student community, because they see that most of their students will be off campus in the future, sitting in places, and the social aspect is really important for them to complete their studies. So kind of seeing these new business models emerge, where community is a really central part of it.
Okay, the last big question here, and I want you to choose one of the two. I'm going to give you two options. You answer only one. You can answer both of them, right? What is your biggest tech fuck up that you've ever done at a peer/whereby, or what has been your most expensive fuck up in the company?
Oh, should have given me this in advance.
No. We got the best answers this way. Is there any like you have to own up to it as something that you have done, like, and if it's possible, not things like I didn't hire the right person. It's like, yeah, everybody has done that. Like something more specific about your business, like.
There's probably a lot of things in terms of rolling things out and exposing functionality before it was really ready, or when it was too buggy, which I have been responsible for as a product person.
I mean, it cannot be worse as like somebody in our first episodes who set his own office on fire, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And the data center, that was massive. And now he's a VP at Amazon. So
yeah. You learn from your mistakes, right?
So I don't know, like no pressure, or as I said, or something like you squander a lot of money on, like, buying an office where you shouldn't have, or like, like something like that. Does anything come to mind?
No, I will let you know if I can think of anything really.
We'll record part 2.
Yes.
No worries. Okay, then 1 minute for you. How can we help you? How can we help Whereby and or IndyRIOT?
Use it. I think I'm a big fan of independent tech solutions and the people who build them as well. So I think every company has power to purchase things from other companies, and if more people were using their power to buy things from smaller companies like us instead of Microsoft or Google, I think I have a vision for a world that's not run by an oligarchy of tech companies, which seems pretty far at the moment, but I think we just have to keep working and provide alternatives. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I wholeheartly subscribe to that. So is that?
More pilot customers for IndyRIOT that wants to help us explore this next generation of.
In terms of talent, you mentioned senior engineers. What other roles are you hiring for?
We're not doing too much hiring at the now, keeping the cash.
Yeah.
In-house, but would love to talk to anyone who's kind of building community or want to talk about the problems or challenges with that, and or who would like to work with us on building up a platform.
Perfect. Yeah, and we'll have to talk. We'll have to talk, because definitely I've got a lot of ideas coming from
I know
startup
you're
grind. So we'll follow up with that. All right, Ingrid, I want to thank you for your time. Let's wrap it up here. Thank you so much. And maybe you will have to tell me how to pronounce your surname, because otherwise I will fuck it up so badly in the in the intro.
Norwegian version is Ødegaard.
Okay.
The international version is Ødegaard.
Yeah, I assume that there's always like that, right? Outside of your country and inside of your country. Thank you very much, Ingrid. Have a nice day. And everybody, just see you in the next episode.
Yeah, great to chat, Alex.